Good evening, everyone, especially our speaker, Keith Robinson, and a very warm welcome to our new season of Black Country Society Virtual Heritage Group Talks. Actually, it's not so warm down here in Devon. We've had a bit of an early autumnal chill in the air tonight. My name is Andrew Homer, and together with Chris Baker and Ward Jones, we take it in turns to chair the meetings and deal with questions and comments. Chris also deals with the technical aspects. The talks are recorded and available on the Society website. Can I ask you to please keep microphones turned off? But if you have any comments or questions for Keith, which we do welcome, please pop them in the chat. The chat icon can be found at the bottom of your Zoom window right near the centre. It's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight, Keith Robinson. Keith is a member of our committee and has recently taken charge of a new initiative involving recognised experts on the Black Country acting as ambassadors for the Society. Now, I know Keith wants to say a little bit about this himself later on. He grew up in Prince's End and Wednesbury before his family moved out of the area. After spending 4 years volunteering in village development work in India, teaching, and then working for the National Trust in the Midlands, he's now very busily retired. Keith is the author of several local books, and I noticed just today that his Black Country Miners Struggle for Justice 1850 to 1926 publication is actually half price at the moment in the Society's online shop. So absolute bargain. Anyway, without any further ado, over to Keith Robinson for tonight's presentation, From the Black Country to Brazil, a 19th century story of hate, hope and upheaval. Over to you, Keith.
Okay, so thanks, Andrew. So why this talk? Why am I going to talk about the Black Country to Brazil? Well, some people might know that very recently, or about a year ago, I've moved to Huddersfield with my family to be closer to my younger daughter. Now I'm in my dotage, and it started me thinking about what it would be like 170 odd years ago, not to just move up to the north of England, but to completely uproot your family and go across to another continent, which you would have had very little or no knowledge of as you lived in the Black Country in the 1860s, because we're talking about 1868. Some people going from an urban setting to a rural setting with actually no idea of what to expect. And as we shall see, that scheme to take people from the Black Country to Brazil actually originated in Wednesbury, where I spent the majority of my childhood 70 plus years ago. So what I'm going to be talking about, if I can change the slide. Right. Is the background to the story, Irish life in mid-19th century Wednesbury, the development of the plan to emigrate to Brazil, the colonist experiences in Brazil, and then we're going to look at some case studies, and then there's going to be a big reveal, but don't get your hopes up too much because it's not all that big, but I thought it sounded okay. So although we're talking about Wednesbury in 1868, this story had its origin some 20 odd years earlier on, and it was all connected with the Irish famine from 1845 to 49. Caused, obviously, as we all know, by the potato blight and 2/3 of the Irish population actually depended on potatoes. What is not as commonly known is that 75% of Irish soil was actually dedicated to the growth of wheat and barley and oats, generally on large landed estates. But all these crops were grown for export. And in just the year 1847, something like 4,000 vessels carrying foodstuffs came from Ireland to English ports. So that sort of puts the famine in some sort of economic perspective. And as we all know, it was a huge human tragedy. 1 million people died, another 2 million fled the country, some went to the USA. Manchester and Liverpool received thousands. And Wednesbury was one of the key towns in the Black Country, along with Wolverhampton, that received, had a large influx of Irish. And in 1851, the census shows that over 3,000 people in Wednesbury were Catholic, and they were mainly Irish. And of course, people gravitated to places like Manchester, Liverpool, Wolverhampton, Wednesbury, because that is where the work was in their struggle to survive. So you can imagine, just put yourself in the picture, that you're coming from a rural background somewhere in Ireland, and most of these Irish immigrants came from Mayo and Galloway, and they're generally from farming backgrounds, and they're coming to smoky Wednesbury. Obviously, this is a photograph from the early 1900s, but it gives you some sort of idea of the place that these settlers were coming to, which had a 50% light level compared with rural areas at the time. And by 1856, it was estimated that there were now about 5,000 Irish Catholics settled in Wednesbury. Now, the Pope at that time was Pius IX, leader of the Catholic Church, and he had some big schemes in mind, one of which was building a lot of new papal constructions in Rome during the 1850s. And he sent out an appeal for money. And those who contributed to that appeal received this medal. And I'm very fortunate to have one of these in my collection, since I'm an anorak numismatist, coin collector, token collector. And on the back of it, it says, "A collection of money to aid our most holy Lord the Pope was commenced at St. Mary's, Wednesbury, in December 1859. And for those who contributed, they received a medal." But one wonders, when you're looking at this, how they managed to collect any money from people in Wednesbury, since the majority of the Catholic congregation would have been poverty stricken. You have to remember that at this time, yes, they were coming for work, but that work was very sporadic. Industry within the Black Country, particularly the iron industry, was summed up by two words, and one was boom, and the other was bust. And in many occasions, there were economic collapses, particularly in the iron industry. So in my opinion, the money shouldn't have been flowing from Wednesbury to Rome. It really should have been flowing the other way around. And we get an idea of the situation in some of these, for some of these Irish immigrants, from a petition that, as we shall see, and I'll quote from this quite a few times, during the evening. That was sent to Pope Pius the Ninth in later on in the 1860s, in which the Irish Catholic community said, "We support ourselves by manual labour, for most part of the rudest sort, and depend for employment chiefly on the great manufacturing industry of this country. When the trade of England languishes, there is little or no need of our services, and we are frequently altogether deprived of employment for many weeks together. In short, our temporal condition is entirely at the disposal of persons who have no relation to us but that of employers, who, so far as we are concerned, using their money only to make more money, hire us to work or dismiss us to idleness as their interests require." So that was the condition and the fate of many of the workers. As I said, many of these Irish immigrants were labourers, particularly in the iron industry. And this is one of my most impactful illustrations, demonstrating, again, much later. But these two chaps are puddlers at an iron factory somewhere in the Black Country. And you can see, but the look on their faces, just how exhausted they were. And it was reckoned that puddlers were finished by the age of 45. They were completely physically worn out. And then, of course, when that happened, you and your family were destitute. And the living conditions for the Irish immigrants were particularly bad in Wednesbury. In fact, they were bad for most of the labouring population. And the Irish community was centred on Portway Road in Wednesbury. And there are no early illustrations of Portway Road. This is from the 1930s, as is this slide. But we get an idea of the conditions that people were living in this area, from a couple of reports, some newspaper reports, some sanitation inspectors' reports from the period, contents of privy running down the steps of a house, one facility or a privy for 5 houses, and as we'll see, quite a few of the boarding houses, and most of the Irish community would have lived in boarding houses. Some were run by their own countrymen or women. So in Catherine Kerrigan's boarding house, in one room, there were 2 beds with 3 men in each, and in the same room, 3 women and a child. In another room, 3 women were sleeping on the floor, along with a man, his wife, and child. In Michael Kenny's house, there were 2 beds in one room with 3 men in each, with another bed with a woman and child. In Margaret Garman's house, in one room, 3 men and 3 women on the floor, and 2 men in a bed. In another room, 2 men, 2 women, and a child on the floor. And of course, many of these Catholic families would have had quite large families. So you get an idea of the working conditions and the living conditions that these Irish settlers in Wednesbury were putting up with. So enter, during the 1950s, Father George Montgomery, who was the first real Catholic priest who was appointed by the Catholic authorities to look after the Catholic flock in Wednesbury. He'd been converted to Roman Catholicism sometime in the 1840s, trained in Birmingham, and was sent to Wednesbury in 1850. And very soon was able to raise funds, quite a bit from his own pocket, quite a lot from sources outside of Wednesbury, to build the Catholic Church, St Mary's, and a nearby school. This isn't the original building, it was replaced later on. And during the 1850s and 1860s, he looked around at the state of his flock, and his concerns were that they were living in poverty, they were strangers in the land, they had neither country nor home, and their children were dying at a rapid rate. We all know that the infant mortality rate was generally about 30 to 40% in that period, and it was even higher, I think, within the Irish community. And above all, or in addition to that, for him, they were losing their Catholic faith. And if you look at newspaper reports of the time concerning the Irish community in Wednesbury, there were a lot of references to their involvement in crime, early death, but particularly drunkenness. So Montgomery was faced with a huge task of trying to improve the life and conditions for his Catholic flock. And again, from the later petition to Pope Pius IX, we see what the feelings of the Irish Catholics were. We are strangers in the land, disliked by the people amongst whom we live because of our nationality, because of our religion, and because we are in competition with them for employment. During the hours of work, we have to associate with persons who assail us with blasphemy against the most sacred doctrines of the Catholic religion, with defamation of the clergy and female religious person, and with obscene discourse. We know also that those around us attribute our poverty, our faults, our follies, and our crimes to the influence of the Catholic faith. At all times, this tempest is felt by the poor Irish in England, but just now, excited by the fraud and malice of certain lunatics, fanatics, and apostates, it rages with a fury against us. And I'll come to that more in a minute. As I said, this was a boom and bust economy. And when it was bust, then the local response was, it's these Irish coming to pinch all our jobs. And for me, plus ça change. What are we looking at today in today's society? Exactly the same response. And going back to the phrase about certain fanatics and apostates, this petition was actually sent in October 1867 to the Pope. And several months earlier, in April of that year, a fanatic called Murphy was circulating around the country, and particularly in the Black Country, whipping up hostility with speeches made in Wolverhampton and Wednesbury. And in April 1867, he addressed a very large crowd of 600 or 700 at Riddings Road Methodist Chapel. And I used to attend that chapel when I was about 8 or 9, and of course knew nothing then of what happened on that day. What happened was that they'd erected a temporary gallery to accommodate so many people who had come to listen to Murphy's diatribe. and the stand collapsed, injuring several hundred people. And Murphy was pretty lucky to escape with his life from the anger of the local Irish community. So, with all this going on, Montgomery had to think of what he was going to do to try and save his flock. And his conclusion was that their only hope was for a life in a new land. And for him, agriculture was a better occupation than industry. You had the quote from the Bible, God had given the earth to the children of men. And on top of this, some of the Irish settlers in the USA were receiving letters from some of their relatives or compatriots who had gone to America and it said, "Oh, you need to come to a different country." But Father Montgomery thought that the important thing was they needed to move to a Catholic country. And when he looked across the world, he settled upon Brazil. Brazil recently had abolished its slave trade, and there was a need for a lot more labor to develop the economy of the country. And that's why we find the petition to the Pope being written in 1867, mentioning Brazil, because they were basically asking for his support and blessing. And probably Montgomery had settled on Brazil because during 1867, a series of adverts appeared in the London Standard, and they were put there by an agent called Joaquim Maria del Almeida. And these adverts read, as we can see, "Emigration to the Brazils, the most productive and promising field upon the globe. Assisted and free passages from England to the ports of Brazil. Bedding, cooking, and all shipping utensils allowed free. Grants of land and facilities afforded for permanent settlement. Emigrants' tools, agricultural implements and machinery free of transport. Emigrants' home open and guide provided. Labour in demand and good wages." Applied to Le Chevalier Joachim de Almeida, Portugal, Commercial Agency of Brazil, Westminster Chambers, Victoria Street, London. What was there not to like about that offer? And in fact, emigration to Brazil was quite strong in the decade from 1864 to 74, and there was something like 100,000 emigrants to Brazil, 6,500 of which actually came from the UK, and they were organised by the International Immigration Society, which had agents all across Europe. So Montgomery set about advertising this possibility. He had been in touch with a Jesuit priest who was in Brazil. This Jesuit priest was called Joseph Lazenby, and he was based in Desterro in the Santa Catarina colony, which he had visited from Desterro, and he said, "You got to come there." And in addition to that, I mean, it's a good place. There's lots of things going on. And in addition to that, they need a priest to come. So the plan was that Father Montgomery was going to organize a party to go to Brazil, and then he would follow in a second party and become the priest in Santa Catarina in the colony there. So, picture the scene. It's the 3rd of February, 1868. 7:30 in the morning, and a large party of 300 plus black country folk, men, women, loads of children, are gathered on Wednesbury Station, pictured here. Some 90 years later, I used to sit on the wall at Wednesbury Station, train spotting. Of course, I knew nothing of the emigration story to Brazil. Anyway, they are gathered at the station early on that February morning. Montgomery had led a service at the church the night before. There were 339 in the group, 256 Irish, 75 English, 4 Scottish, 3 Dutch, and 247 of which were recruited from Wednesbury. They caught the train from Wednesbury, travelled to Liverpool, from where they planned to get a ship over to Brazil, and ended up in the Liverpool docks. The only problem was, and there's always problems in this story, is that Almeida had supplied bills of credit amounting to 3,700 to the shipping agents based in Liverpool, but the Brazilian delegation in London said that he was not authorized to issue contracts or promise any grants. Oh. So these 300 men, women, and children were sheltered and housed in an emigration depot in Birkenhead for several weeks, while the British government negotiated with the Brazilian delegation to try and resolve the issue. The person who was nominally in charge of the group, a chap called John Connolly, who was basically Montgomery's agent, reported back to Montgomery that the Wednesbury group were quite placid and content, but the Birmingham group moaned their heads off. Anyway, after 3 weeks, they managed to resolve the issue, and the Brazilian legation agreed to pay the shipping costs. So 22nd of February, they boarded the Florence shipment on their way to Brazil, and apparently it was relayed back that the food that they got on board, and bearing in mind generally the state of food that you did get on board, but they reported back that the food was far better than they were accustomed to back in Wednesbury and the Black Country. So they're off to Brazil, and 3 months after leaving, they arrived at Rio de Janeiro, and that's a contemporary photograph of emigrants arriving in the port of Rio, which looked something like this around that time. This is an image from 1874, and the group were put up in an immigrants' hostel in Rio. And this was an important occasion because 2 days after they'd actually arrived, they were honoured by a visit from the Emperor of Brazil himself, no doubt. Pedro II, who came along with the Minister of Agriculture to welcome the newcomers to his country. So maybe things were going fine. But as a chap called Scully, who was the editor of a local newspaper, pointed out, they were very fortunate to arrive post the summer season and its heat, and they had also landed post the yellow fever outbreaks that were common during the summer season. But no matter, they'd arrived and been welcomed by the emperor himself. Now, there were several colonies in the process of being set up in Brazil. One was an Astonishing in Parana province. One was Canaania in Sao Paulo province. And the province of Santa Catarina had its colony by the name of Principio Dom Pedro, named after the the emperor of Brazil at the time. Now, I mentioned William Scully, who was the editor of the Anglo-Brazilian Times, who had said they were pretty lucky to have arrived when they did. He recommended that they don't actually go to Principio Dom Pedro, since in his view, it was entirely unsuitable for any agricultural development. The only problem was that it was the Principio Dom Pedro colony that needed the or had the largest capacity for people, and the Wednesbury group generally wanted to stay together. Some of the Birmingham lot went to Astonishing, but most of the Wednesbury group said, we want to stay together. We will go to the province of Santa Catarina, which, of course, Joseph Lazenby, the Jesuit priest that Montgomery had been in contact with, had encouraged them to go. So several weeks later, they go down by ship to the province of Santa Catarina and dock at the port of Itajaí. The only way to the colony of Principio Dom Pedro from the port was by river, and the only time you could go by river was when it was quite low. It was totally impassable when it flooded, and the journey by river was something like 50 kilometers to the settlement. While they were waiting for a boat to take them down the river, they were met by some people coming back from Principio Dom Pedro, who said, don't go, it's not worth it. But the Wednesbury group shrugged it off. They were determined to make a success of the area. The capital of Santa Catarina at that time was Brusque, which looks quite nice there. But the area that they were going to, which was pretty undeveloped. In fact, that's about the only map from the time that exists, which is basically has the rivers on it and the name of the colony and little else. Most of what they would have encountered would have looked like this. And this obviously is a much more recent photograph. So this is the sort of terrain that they would have encountered as they journeyed down the river, and indeed when they got to Principio Dom Pedro. The colony itself was initially had been settled by German settlers. This isn't from the colony, but it's a group of German settlers sometime in Brazil at the late 19th century. And none of them, when they got there, none of the German settlers, nor any of the officials who were in charge of the colony could speak English. They only spoke German. So really, they ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time for several reasons. One was there was a new government in Brazil, and that halved and then suspending all the funding for work in the colonies. And any claims from the colonies for work done and bonuses for building houses were cancelled. And the government store, which had offered credit to colonists, was closed. There was a lot of arguing within the colony itself. They got through 4 directors in that first year in 1868. Some for corruption. A couple of them were temporary directors. And one sort of gave up the ghost because he just couldn't cope with the arguments that were going on. So the warning that had been issued at Itaji when the Wednesbury group had landed there was indeed one that they perhaps should have listened to. And the final blows that they encountered, if that wasn't enough, were 2 huge floods in November 1868 and spring of 1869, when the sawmill and gristmill of the colony was swept away, the slaughterhouse was smashed, houses were swept away, and several of the colonists were actually drowned. And that's what the Itaji River looks like when it is in flood. Quite surprisingly, we may think, there were actually a number of letters that the Wednesbury colonists wrote back to their relatives. Surprising, I say, because you might think that they lacked the education to do that. And the letters that we do have are all from women, which is even more surprising. Regarding the flood in November 1868, Bridget Shaughnessy wrote to her mother, "My dear mother, I must let you know to my grief that my husband was drowned on the 3rd of August. He was going for seeds and had to pass a large river in a canoe or small boat, and it turned over and he was drowned. Another man that was with him saved himself. He was drowned in 4 feet of water, and then he was swept by the flood into a place that was 18 feet in depth, and they could not find him until his body rose in 6 days. I'm very lonesome since, and I do not like to leave here because I had a fine house built and a fine lot of land. If you were coming on, I think I would not go home, but as you're not coming, I think I'll return." Obviously, that refers to an incident in October Obviously, the November flood would have put paid to any hopes that they had. Then another recollection by Peter Hayes, one of the settlers. On the last Thursday of the month of November 1869, about the hour of 12 noon, the sky, which had been very clear, suddenly darkened and it began to rain. Rain in such torrents as I never before witnessed in my life, accompanied by loud peals of thunder, all of which continued at intervals for 12 hours. The river Itaji began to rise with fearful rapidity until it reached the village. A man called Miles Kirby and his family took refuge with another family called the Hopkins, and Mrs. Hopkins and two of her children were swept away. Another settler from Wednesbury, John Haskell, spent 16 hours in the flood water and later died as a result. So during the last months of 1868 and months of 1869, what happened was that a number of the settlers began to appear somehow having made their way from the colony to the streets of Rio de Janeiro, looking for what they might do and where they might go afterwards. Some of them went to the Vice Consul's office at Destero. The British Vice Consul from Santos went to investigate and took settlers back to Santos on his steamer. And some eventually went to the USA and other colonies. So I just thought we would look at what happened to some of the individuals that we know went from Wednesbury and the surrounding district. And I picked out a few. I've followed up as best I can quite a number of those who I know came from Wednesbury and its surroundings. So I've just picked out a handful. One of them was John Connolly, who I mentioned before, was Montgomery's agent, as it were, with the group and reported back to Montgomery. He had been a miner in Wolverhampton. You'll find him listed as such in the 1861 census. And he was one of those who signed the petition to the Pope in 1867. And if you look at the 1871 census for Wednesbury, you will find him back there as a miner. Another interesting couple were Austin and Martha Orgill. Austin was born in Wednesbury, and again, in 1861, you'll find him listed in the census as an ironworks labourer. He got married to Martha Connolly, as she was, in 1866, and they went full of hope with their young baby to Principio Dom Pedro. And after the floods, they made their way back to Rio, and it was there that their story darkened. Martha wrote back to her sister, who was living in Liverpool at the time, saying, "We had made arrangements to start from Rio in an English steamer to New York on the 19th of January and had everything ready, only waiting for the time, but the children had had the whooping cough about 2 weeks then. And then on the 13th, they broke out with the smallpox. Poor little Mary commenced with convulsions and was never out of them until she died. She did not know either of us all the while. There was no hope of Mary from the first, but great ones of Joseph. But poor little pet he died on the first evening of the 19th of January, and our pretty little Mary on the morning of the 20th. They were both buried together in the same grave. Mary was 3 years, 2 months. Joseph 1 year and 4 months. And my dearest sisters, I sincerely hope you will never have the trouble to go through I have had to sit and watch my two pretty ones dying together, and did not know which to pay the most attention to, or which would leave me first. I was that exhausted with sitting up for 7 days and 7 nights, for you must know, while life was in them, I could not leave them. I had to lie down at last by my dear Mary's side and close her sweet little eyes in death. I can assure you it has been a very heavy blow to us both, for in all our troubles she was a great comfort. She was old-fashioned. She was just like an old woman. And it was very hard after bringing him through all the trouble and to lose them at last. But their story didn't end there. They eventually went to Pittsburgh, and in the equivalent census in the USA at the time, they're living in Pittsburgh, the couple with 8 children. Another one I followed up was John Horan, who got married to his wife Catherine in the year that they emigrated to Brazil. Their son John was born in Principio Dom Pedro, and they too left for Pittsburgh. That was one of the most favorite destinations for settlers who were fleeing Brazil. And again, if you look at the American censuses for the period, you will find that they were still there, the family, in 1910. Next one I followed up was John Horan. I've just said that, sorry. The next one was John MacDonald. He was actually born in Ireland in County Mayo, and we find him in the 1861 census as a bricklayer's labourer. He also signed the petition to the Pope. He didn't go to Principio Dom Pedro, but went to Astonishing instead. But he too returned, and you will find him back as a bricklayer's labourer in the 1881 census on Queen Street in Wednesbury. And then finally, we've got Tobias Butler, born in 1822. He was a labourer in Darlaston, and he went with his wife and 5 children. They too left Principio Dom Pedro in 1870. They didn't go to Pittsburgh. They went to Oregon, where he died in 1899. And there's several other stories that you can follow up for what happened to some of the Wednesbury settlers. So how do we wind this up? What happened to George Montgomery, Father George, whose vision and it was, and who made all those plans? Well, I think really you could say that Father Montgomery died of a broken heart. He only lived through a couple of years, or less than a year, after the collapse of the colony, and died in March 1871. And you will find a plaque to him in St. Mary's in Wednesbury today. So that's the story of the Wednesbury colonists from the Black Country to Brazil. So what's this big reveal then, eh? So the big reveal is my great-great-grandfather William Rose and his wife Elizabeth were amongst those who left Wednesbury in for Brazil in 1868 with their 4 children. My mum, when I was a kid, told me that our ancestors had gone to Brazil, but I thought it was a bit of an old wives' tale. But it was actually true. When some other people that I've traced who had Rose connections, who went, have more stories about the children seeing huge snakes. And apparently, my great granddad was known in the family as Amazon Bill. And obviously, they returned to Wednesbury. Otherwise, folks, I wouldn't be talking to you tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. Just like to say a big thank you for joining us tonight, and fascinating talk on a topic that I previously knew little or nothing about, I have to say. I did mention earlier that you're involved in this new ambassadors